Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.
Thank you kindly. Well, hello to all of you joining us today. It is quite an honor to be sharing some thoughts with you today, so I hope that you find some of my stories interesting and maybe, more importantly, useful. I used to be, as Ali said, I used to be a professor, a scholar publishing papers and teaching graduate courses in business, mostly in leadership. Today, I've been very lucky to have discovered a new career speaking and writing full-time. For the last decade, I've basically been traveling and telling stories that hopefully business people find useful, both for their teams and their organizations and for their lives. And I've slowly but surely begun connecting with a much larger community thanks to the internet. So I tell you, thank you kindly and very sincerely. It's happy to be here today. Okay, so I know a lot of you think of professors and you think of really boring, dry lectures. I'm not going to do that. You'll notice the screen just has some contact information. I don't lecture. I just share stories that I've collected from people and experiences over time that maybe help us focus on some lessons that make us more productive. So let me start by telling you something I learned at the age of 25. I was 25 years old. I was working for the world's largest consulting firm. At the time they were called Anderson. Now they are referred to as Accenture. I was young, 25, full of energy. I wanted to take the world by the tail. I wanted to be promoted. I wanted to someday be a partner in this firm. I really was a go-getter, but I had not yet done something significant enough to get promoted. I wanted that first big promotion. You know why? It would signal that I had arrived. It would signal that I was an up-and-comer, somebody on the move, and I was looking for that opportunity. I actually got lucky at one point. I was working for a manufacturing client, and I saw the opportunity. I was asked by the client to take a machine that normally takes 3 hours to be changed over from making product A to make product B. The changeover time was huge at over 3 hours. They asked me, can you get this down as low as possible? Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm fairly bright, but I'm actually more lucky than I am smart. Me and my team figured out a way to get that changeover time down to under 3 minutes. Of course, when we did that, the client was thrilled. We just helped them realize many millions in new capacity in their manufacturing environments. My boss was excited, grinning ear to ear, and I knew that I had now done the one big home run that was necessary to earn that first big promotion. So I went back to the office a few days later. I'm working on my laptop. The telephone rings. It was my boss. My boss said, could you come down to my office, Todd? I said, sure, of course. And I hung up the phone and I grinned like a little kid, knowing I was about to find out that I was going to get that big promotion. So I walked down the hall, happy as you can imagine, so happy. I walked into my boss's office. He said, hey, could you shut the door? I said, sure, and I shut the door. He said, have a seat. I said, okay, and I had a seat. And then he said to me something that shocked me. He said, what is that on your arm? And he pointed to a tattoo on my arm. And I said, well, sir, that's a snake. And then he said loudly, you know what? I don't care what that is. What I care about is that the client saw that. The client did not like that. The client thought that you have poor judgment. The client thought that we have poor judgment for hiring people silly enough to get tattoos. Listen very carefully, my boss said to me. If you have any future in this organization, you will learn to be socially intelligent. You will learn to manage impressions. I'm telling you right now, you will roll down your sleeves. You will not show those tattoos in this office or at our client sites ever again. Do you understand? I'll be honest with you. I was 25. I didn't like what I was hearing, and this was not the conversation that I expected to be having that day. I thought I was getting promoted. Instead, I was being punished because my boss and my client didn't like something I had done. And you know what I did? I said to my boss, "Sure, of course, I understand, no problem." That was 25. 10 years later, I was 35 years old. I was on the back end of a career as a professor, on the front end of a career as a professional speaker. I got up one day. I had to teach a class and then do a speech for a client, and then I was going to meet an old friend for lunch. When I got up to go to class, I put on a very nice, very expensive sports coat, a suit coat. You know why? Because I learned my lesson when I was 25 years old, and I believed I was supposed to meet the expectations of my audience and show social intelligence. So I wore the nice coat to prove that I was a professional and prove I was an adult. I went to class, had a great time with my students, and then I went to the client, and I gave a great speech and shook some hands, and then I went to lunch. Now, I was having lunch with an old friend who I had known when we were in high school as teenagers. You know, sometimes you have friends at work, people who know you pretty well, but then you've got people you knew from back in the day, from when you were growing up, and they know all of the silly things that you did when you were young. I was having lunch with one of those people, a wonderful woman I had not seen in many years. I walked into the restaurant. We both grinned, hugged, sat down, and talked about family for, maybe a minute or two before I caught her looking at my jacket. And she was grinning, and then she started laughing. I said the obvious, "What are you laughing at?" And she said, "That is a really fancy jacket you got there, Todd." I knew what she was doing. She was making fun of me because I was very well known to be casual in terms of how I dress. Always very casual. I live in blue jeans. I never wear ties, things of that nature. And she said, "That is a fancy jacket you've got there. You know, when did you grow up and start wearing such fancy clothes?" You know what? I said, "Let me tell you a story." When I was 25 years old, and I told her the story about what happened to me years ago when I was 25 and the lesson that I learned about the need to meet expectations socially, the need to manage impressions. And she listened and she nodded politely. Then she said something interesting to me. She said, "Well, maybe you're right. Maybe. You know what? I got to tell you, you were 25. That was 10 years ago. You're a very different person today. The world, in fact, is a very different place today. I'm not sure that's the best strategy for you today." I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "Well, maybe it made sense for you back then to follow that advice, but I'm not sure it's the best advice now." I said, "Okay, what are you suggesting? What do you think I should do?" And she said, "I think you'd be better off if you took off that jacket and rolled up your sleeves when you're dealing with clients and intentionally show your ink. Show your ink." I said, "Okay, that sounds a little reckless to me, so that's going to work, huh? Why? Why is that going to work?" And then she said something that was useful beyond words that kind of changed my life. She said, "Because people like real. People like real. Authenticity." I thought about this. I thought it still sounded a little reckless, but it was honest. It was intriguing. Authenticity. She got me thinking from that day on about authenticity. And as a scholar, I realized something. The research kind of backed her up. You know what? Men and women go to work every day, and they manage impressions, which does make you socially intelligent. But, and this is a big but, we often do that, ladies and gentlemen, so much that we fail to show people the real, complete, full us. We show them a polished image. We show them a truncated version of ourselves that we think is quote-unquote professional. And what we often look like is a person occupying a role, a person in a position of leadership, not necessarily a real human being. And what we know as scholars is that if you will figure out how to bravely relate to other people around you as a human being and not just a person occupying a role, they will feel closer to you, listen to you, better follow your directions more closely. Oh, by the way, it's free. The very best things we've ever studied that make people better versions of themselves, make teams better versions of themselves, are free. So I started thinking about her advice. And I started thinking about what this means for you guys running teams and organizations, and what this means for me as a professional, the idea of authenticity. Now, one of the first things I realized is that being a great leader isn't so much about fixing the crazy people with whom you work. Now, if you were standing right in front of me, I would ask for a show of hands. Hey, how many of you actually work with crazy people? No doubt, no doubt, a lot of you would raise your hands. I've seen this many times. And then I have to say to you, very politely, very respectfully, being a great leader does not start with fixing the crazy people around you. Being a great leader starts with improving yourself first. I like to say it a different way. I like to say it like this. You have to learn to get over yourself. Leaders, experts, professionally accomplished people of whatever type you might be, listen, you have to sometimes get down off of that pedestal, put 2 feet on the ground, close your mouth, open your eyes, and see the unique individuals around you for who they are, unique individuals, each adding value in different ways. Listen, when they know that you're seeing them as a genuine individual, it's amazing how your team will look at you differently and be more interested in knowing who you are and why you do what you do and taking your instructions and advice seriously. That's reciprocity. And it's amazing how it starts happening after you start to get down off of that pedestal. Now, I learned this lesson when I was young, but I think I saw someone once who learned this lesson in a way that was hilarious and amazing. Back in the day when I was still a professor, I had a gentleman in class. His name was Dave. I was teaching MBA students, Masters of Business Administration, at a lovely school in Dayton, Ohio called Wright State University. And MBA students are often very young, 20-somethings. Sometimes you get lucky, you get a 30-something or someone in their 40s. And when you do get someone in their 40s or older, it's awesome. I love that because they have great life experience. A lot more than the kids who are 25, 26, 27. So I'm in class. I'm talking one night, giving a big lecture, and Dave's sitting in class. Dave is 42. He's a young executive, and I'm talking about motivating employees and different ways we know how to do that. What's it mean to engage your employees? And in the middle of this lecture, Dave raised his hand. Now, most people in my courses never raise their hands. We just have a very robust, ongoing dialogue, a big, loud conversation. But not Dave. Dave was very traditional, and he was polite, and he raised his hand. And when he did that, we all quieted down because we knew that Dave had something useful to add. And so I stopped lecturing. I said, Dave, what do you got? And he said, well, Doc, I wanted to tell the class that I agree with you about these theories and these ideas you're sharing, but I also wanted to tell the class that it is a lot more difficult getting all of this stuff correct when you're really dealing with people, actual people at work, as opposed to just sitting in class talking about things. I said, you're right, Dave, that's a good point. So I'm guessing you have an example? He said, yeah, I have an example. I thought I'd share it with the class. I'm not used to messing up. I'm not used to failing and having mistakes. And recently I did. I really did have an ugly learning moment. I messed up. I learned something. I thought maybe if I share it with the class, then you guys would avoid doing the same thing that I did. And I said, well, great. Thanks for sharing. Speak up. Tell us what the example is. He goes, well, you guys know I've recently been appointed as an executive for the first time. I am now a leader of leaders. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, I know the power of thank you. I know the power of gratitude. I know these things you're talking about matter. And so, you know what I did? I waited after I was appointed the executive over these people. I waited until there were a bunch of collective milestones piling up, a bunch of achievements piling up that really did justify a collective thank you. And months after I was appointed, when the group had stacked up a bunch of good wins, I decided it was time. So you know what I did? I walked out in the middle of all these cubicles and offices, and I called a huddle. A huddle, an impromptu meeting. It was not scheduled. No one knew it was coming. I just walked out there and I said, everybody over here, I need to talk to you. Let's go. And he called over all 20 or so managers who reported to him. Dave, like a good coach, took a knee and said to them, folks, you are doing great work. Thank you. You're making me look wonderful as your new boss. I'd like to show you how much I appreciate all of your contributions, and that is why I'm going to take the whole group to happy hour. In the West, happy hour is, of course, a reference to people meeting at some sort of establishment for a beer or a glass of wine. Now, I have to tell you the obvious. As you well know, ladies and gentlemen, some people enjoy adult beverages. Other people do not, for a variety of reasons. We all know this. Dave did not think about that at all. Friday rolled around. Dave went to the appointed place waiting for his team to show up and have a drink with the boss, and guess what happened? Half of his team showed up. This puzzled him. He could not believe only half the team showed up. He was absolutely amazed there weren't more people. There was one guy on the team who had worked with Dave for years and felt comfortable speaking to him, even though he was the boss, and he could see that Dave's face was long and maybe even confused. And when the night was over and everyone had basically left, he said to Dave, I can tell that you're kind of bummed out, you're kind of upset that this didn't work the way you thought it was. And Dave said, yeah, you're right, I can't believe more people didn't show up. And this guy said to Dave, you know, I got to be honest with you, with respect, not everyone likes to drink. And you know what, it's even worse. Dave said, worse? And his employee said, yeah, it's even worse. You know what, some of the people who showed up, well, most of the people who showed up, they really didn't show up to enjoy a drink with the boss. They actually came because they thought that somehow if they did not come, they would lose points with you back in the office. Somehow you would be angry with them for not coming. Now, this is interesting. Dave is not used to mistakes. Dave is not used to misreading people. And yet he did in this case. He tried to do something positive for his employees, and he unexpectedly created a negative outcome. He was very embarrassed, very embarrassed. He went back to the office. He said to my class that night, it took several days before I felt comfortable looking at people in the eye. And during that time, you know what I did? I resolved to think of some awesome thank you that I could give the team later when they really earned it, that was so awesome that it would erase that odd incident with happy hour. He said, I waited for months. I watched all of the work pile up. I watched all of the milestones of success pile up, and I knew it was time, once again, to give a big collective thank you to my team. So, Dave said, for a brave second time, I walked out in the middle of all those cubicles and offices, and I called a huddle. Hey, everybody! Over here, I need to talk to you. And you can imagine how people kind of hung their head when they heard that, thinking, oh boy, here comes happy hour again. Dave took a knee like a good coach as his team gathered around. And he said, folks, You are doing wonderful work. I want to tell you thank you for how much I appreciate your contributions. I am going to take the whole team canoeing. Riding in boats down a river, canoeing. You can imagine what these poor people were thinking. Oh my goodness, now I've got to go out in the sun all day long with this guy. Sure enough, 2 weekends later, Dave went canoeing on a canoeing trip with his team, and guess what? The same half of his team showed up. Almost to a person, the same half. And with long, bored faces, they all canoed down the river, wishing they were somewhere else. Now, at the end of this affair, the same employee gave Dave the same feedback, saying, hey, man, you just did the same thing twice, but this time you wasted an entire weekend. Well, Dave got this feedback, and truly, ladies and gentlemen, felt like a failure for the first time in his career. It's not something he was used to. It's not something he enjoyed. It's not something he wanted to do again. He went back to the office and he felt disconnected, somehow strangely unable to connect correctly with people, read them correctly. And he just sat there. He told my class that night, I just sat there and I watched them do what they do right there in the office. And finally, unexpectedly, it hit me. I said, what hit you? He goes, it hit me. I realized what I'd been doing this entire time. I said, what's that? He said, well, the only thing I had been doing up until this point was projecting me onto them. That's all, just projecting me onto them. You know what? He said to my class in a very confessional way, he said to my class, you know what? I like to drink. And you know what? I like to canoe. In fact, sometimes I like to have a drink while I'm canoeing, which was humorous, as you can imagine. He said, my breakthrough, thankfully, was in understanding how little that had to do with my team. Somehow, I realized that they were different than me for the first time, and that was awesome. He said, it was like a new lens clicked into place, and I could literally see them differently. And when that lens clicked in place, I saw something. I saw something that was right in front of me every day, but I had not seen it until this point. And we're sitting in class, and we're listening to the story, and we're dying to know what he saw. And he said, it was right there. I noticed that every member of my team, in their office, on their desk, on their walls, or in their cubes, had a very clear indication that they were all big fans of professional wrestling. Now, I don't know about you nice men and women. In the West, there is a hilarious entertainment thing called professional wrestling where people act like they're tough guys and they have battles in the ring, and it's a big family entertainment thing, and it's really hokey and silly, and a lot of people love it, and a lot more people make fun of it. Now, Dave thought that professional wrestling was just about the silliest thing ever created by man. But he recognized that that had no importance because it was something that was valued by his team. And you know what? Months later, the next time his group of managers who reported to him collectively had a bunch of things worth applauding, he walked out for a very brave third time in the middle of all those cubicles, workspaces, and offices and called an unannounced huddle. Hey, everybody, come on over and we'll talk to you. You can only imagine how people's heads fell, thinking to themselves, oh, man, what is he going to make us do now? He took a knee like a good coach, and he said, you guys are doing wonderful work. Thank you. And then he shocked everyone, and he pulled out tickets to the wrestling show. And the next weekend, he took his team to the local entertainment coliseum and watched the professional wrestling show with his team. What percentage of his team do you think attended this time? Your intuition is very likely on the money. 100% of his team showed up. Dave said to my class that what happened that evening was quite magical. People looked me in the eyes comfortably for the first time. They called me by my first name and talked to me comfortably for the first time. He said to my class, I could tell that I was still the leader, but for the first time, I was also a member of the team. Thank goodness I learned to get over myself. Thank goodness I learned to get over myself. A wonderful, simple lesson. Great leadership doesn't start with them. It starts with you. And I'll be honest with you, something amazing happens when you learn how to embrace authenticity, when you tend to show people a little more of the full, complete, unfiltered, authentic you. You actually, as a leader, end up getting away with a lot of things that other people can't get away with at work. I'll give you an example. A lot of managers, and this is particularly true in the West, a lot of managers really fall all over themselves trying to say thank you and give out recognition and rewards of different types. I ask audiences all the time, hey, do you think at work that we reward people too little or too much? And almost always they say, too little. And I reply, you're wrong. The answer is too much. Now listen, I jokingly say this. It started in the 1960s. I like to blame the hippies. The truth is there was a group of psychologists and other researchers in the 1960s, and they figured out something interesting. They figured out that if you will affirm a child, meaning say something positive to them, you will build their self-confidence. And in doing so, you will have set them up for a successful, productive life by building their self-confidence. You know what? That's a logical thing to say, to think. It's also true that we as a society, at least in North America, we as a society, we embraced that way, way too much. We started affirming kids like crazy. And you know what happened? After a couple generations, a couple decades anyway, we created a big wave of what now are often called trophy kids. Maybe some of you have heard this term, trophy kids. These are kids who believe that just participating in whatever the event is somehow amazing and worthy of receiving an award. Performance no longer matters, just participation. This is a travesty. This is a problem. If you want to understand what a productive life is like, you have to understand what it means to try hard, learn, sometimes fail, and occasionally achieve. That is the natural order of things. Participation isn't something in and of itself that is awesome. So I'll pick on my youngest son, for example. His name is Parker. Parker started to play Little League Baseball couple of years ago. Let me tell you something. I'm just being honest. You ready? Parker was not that good. Parker's team, well, they weren't that good either. But guess what? At the end of the season, when the baseball season was over, guess who got a trophy? Everybody. Everyone received a big, shiny trophy. They didn't do anything to earn it, but they got a big, shiny trophy. What do you think they learned? Now, when I ask that, a lot of people say nothing. They didn't learn anything. And you know what? The truth is, it's worse than that. They learned, hey, I breathe. Therefore, I'm awesome. That is a really bad lesson to teach children. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And you know what? I can't change the world tomorrow, but I can raise my children correctly. And so I'm going to tell you a quick story about my oldest son. His name is Paxton. Paxton was 6 years old when this story began. I came home from work one day. I was a professor. I loved that job. But nonetheless, you can still become tired and stressed out. And I was tired that day and stressed out. I came home from work. I'm in the kitchen. I took off my jacket. I took off my bag from my shoulder. And I looked in the other room. I saw my son, Paxton. He did a double take. He moved his head back and forth. He saw Daddy. He smiled really big, and he stood up and ran towards me and jumped up in my arms to give me a hug that just melts the stress of the day away. Spectacular feeling. I'm looking at this boy. He pulls away from me. He's in my arms, but he pulls away from me, and I noticed something. I noticed something hilarious. Suspended around his neck by a red, white, and blue ribbon was a ridiculously large gold medal. I mean, this thing was as big as his head. So I said the obvious. Okay, Pax, wow, that's an amazing gold medal, kid. Where did you get that? And he said, swimming. And then I remembered he had just finished the first summer swimming with the community team where we lived. And I said, good for you. That is a big medal. Son, what did you do to earn that medal? And my son, ladies and gentlemen, looked at me with no hesitation and with no shame and said to me, nothing. We all got one. I couldn't believe he said that. I set the boy on the ground in front of me, and I bent over and got down on his level. And I said to him, wow, that's unfortunate, isn't it, Paxton? And he looked at me confused, and I began to explain to him what it means to connect the use of recognition and rewards with the production of excellence, what it means to strive and truly earn something. I'm in the middle of a sermon like nobody's business when this young boy in the middle of one of my sentences got his fill of what I was saying and decided to turn around and walk away. So it wasn't my greatest moment. Now, the next year, Paxton went to the second grade, and his teacher was a woman who I will respect for the rest of my life. Her name was Emily Hendricks. Emily is now retired, unfortunately, because she was a great teacher. And she said to these boys and girls, on the first day of the second grade, she said, welcome to the second grade. I am so happy to see all of your little faces. We are going to have so much fun this year in the second grade. She's showing so much enthusiasm. She's smiling. The kids react to that. They're all smiling, thinking the second grade is going to be fun. She said, but I do want you to know we have a lot to do. I'm going to work you really hard this year. And as she started talking about work, the little smiles across the room started to fade. She said, let me give you an example. Every week, at least once, we're going to take a timed math test. A math test. And boys and girls, the standard on this test is high. I want you to try to get all of the problems correct under 3 minutes with no errors at all. That is a high standard. In fact, it's such a tough standard that it is often multiple years before one of my students hits that level of production. Now, these little kids are hearing this, and their smiles are gone. They're not enjoying the second grade as she talks about how hard this test is going to be. And then she shocked them. She surprised them. She said, but if you're capable of that level of achievement, this will be yours. And she pulled out a gift card, a small gift card to a very large, well-known retail store where these kids knew there were lots of video games and candy and other things that kids want. It was a gift card worth $10, and these kids' jaws dropped. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not know in your life what $10 means to you. I do know that to a room full of second grade kids, $10 is $1 million. It's like a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. She set the gift card on the corner of her desk, and she said, if you can do it, this will be yours. And they started. Week 1, week 2, week 3. They had fun. That's great. They improved on the test as they took it. That's even better. But nobody got the ultimate standard she had defined. Week 4, week 5, week 6, same thing. Kids had fun. They got better on that test, but nobody got the ultimate standard. Until week 7, when my boy, Paxton Dewett. He had a great night's sleep, a good breakfast, a good attitude. And he went to school, did as he was told to do, and Emily Hendricks said, go on that test. And Paxton sat down, and sometimes, folks, you know this, sometimes you're just in the zone. Sometimes you're just having a great day. She said, go on that test. And he knocked it out of the park. He got all of them correct, under 3 minutes, with no errors. Now, half an hour later, Emily Hendricks is at her desk grading this stack of tests. The children are at their desks working on a task, waiting on her to finish. She goes through this whole stack. She finishes it. She realizes one kid, my child, actually got 100%, and she's so happy. And she looked up and she said, Paxton Dewett? And because he's my child, he, of course, assumed he was in trouble. He looked up and said, yes, ma'am? She said, come here. He started thinking to himself, what did I do? What did I do? He walked out to the middle of the classroom, and she met him there, smiling, and he saw her smile. So he started smiling, not knowing what was going on, and she took him to the front of the classroom because she wanted to make a point to these young, developing human beings about what it means to be successful. And she said to my son, Paxton, congratulations. You made 100 on the test. He said, really? She said, yes, you've been studying. And he said, yes, ma'am. And she said, well, congratulations. You've earned this. This is yours. And she reached to the corner of her desk, and she grabbed the gift card, and she handed it to my boy. And little kid's jaws dropped across that classroom. And my son took the card and then floated back to his desk, a man among children. It was very funny. True story. The kids lined up. They wanted to touch the card. Somehow it had become magical to them over the many weeks that they stared at it. Now, that day I came home from work stressed out, as sometimes happens, and I took off my bag and I took off my jacket in the kitchen. I looked in the other room. I saw my awesome little boy, and he saw me, and he stood up and he started running towards me as he had many times before, and he jumped up in my arms and gave me an awesome hug that melted the stress of the day away. Now, this time, when the boy pulled away from me, I noticed something. I noticed that clutched in his little hand was a $10 gift card, and I thought to myself, whoa, where did he get that? And so I asked him, and you know what he did? He got all animated and excited, and he explained to me how he worked so hard, studied so hard to make sure he could perform well on that test, and he eventually earned 100% on that test, and he felt so happy, and he got this gift card, and he ended this entire rant by looking at me. Parents, if you're listening, looking at me and saying, Dad, I earned it. You know what? I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that my boy, then 6, now 11 years old, fundamentally understands one of the most important rules for business and for life, which is that all recognition and rewards should be connected to the production of excellence, not just meets standards, not just okay, but excellence. We've forgotten that in many places in the world, as we've fallen all over ourselves to say thank you just for participating. Now listen carefully. I'm not saying that you can't give people things in business. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying that if you want it to truly have impact, then you have to make sure they earn it. Ladies and gentlemen, I have another 5 days of stories that I could share with you, but I'm going to end my discussion of leadership and authenticity by telling you thank you for listening. I hope these very simple but important lessons kind of find a home with you. Maybe you can take them with you back to your teams and figure out how to use them for yourself. I'm very happy to entertain questions.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Todd. I don't know if you heard me. My microphone was mute. But folks, we're open for the Q&A now. If you have any questions, you can put it in the question box, or you could raise your hand and I'll unmute your microphone so you can speak to Dr. Todd. But I see there are a few questions in the question box, so let me go straight. First question, Dr. Todd, why do you think people underestimate the power of being genuine or just be human to another human than preferring to becoming an actor? In particularly when they take up a role of leadership. Most of the time people come across too artificial.
I think that's a spectacular question, and I'll tell you, we are wired as a species, as humans, we are wired to want to look good, not look bad. And in some ways, that is useful and understandable. My position, my contention, is that we simply take that too far. So, for example, leaders believe, and they're wrong, they're usually wrong, they believe that if they want the team to listen to them and to respect them and to follow them, that they have to put forward their accolades, their awards, their achievements, their expertise, all the things that are good about them. And they can't share at all their errors, their mistakes, their learning moments, their failures. In most societies, this is true. In the West in particular, this is very true. I think it's fairly universal. We are wired to believe, and we are trained as kids to believe, as children. We are trained to believe that failure is horrific. It's horrible. It is a stigma. It is a stain upon you. Listen carefully when I say that is a tragedy, because what we know about successful people and what we know about successful organizations is that they are always the best at failing and learning. Failing and using it to become a better version of themselves. And this is a great end to your question, when leaders once in a while, not every day, but a couple times a year, learn to make fun of themselves just a little bit by sharing some of their mistakes and learning moments, it's amazing how much more their team feels close to them, feels like caring about them, feels like listening to them. You know why? Because when a leader occasionally does that, they become more human, and people like to relate to other humans, not just people occupying roles at work. Great question.
Well, thank you. We have another question. As a leader responsible for managing people, don't you think being authentic all the time could fire back at times, especially when you're also responsible for managing employees through emotional intelligence?
That's an interesting question. Emotional intelligence is a whole other topic. I'll just I'll answer the first part of what you said, which is, if you're too authentic all the time, can it cause you problems? Absolutely, you're correct to say that. The reason I push authenticity is because what I watch as a person who gets to see many thousands of professionals every year, I watch people very seriously err on not being authentic, which is why I push people to be a little bit more open and real and approachable and human. To your point, is it possible that you can be too open, too honest, too completely you and cause yourself problems? Absolutely. But, here's the big but, it's amazing what you can get away with when your performance is very clearly above average. This is the way I often say it. You earn idiosyncratic credits. You earn the latitude to be you a little more to the degree that you perform well. So if you're not a pleasant person or if you're a low performer, can you imagine authenticity being a problem? Absolutely. But the reason I stick with my advocacy for authenticity is because the average professional absolutely doesn't embrace it today. And so I'm on something of a campaign to try and get people to open up just a little bit more about who they really are as a person. Your point's a good one, but I think it's a minority, a real minority of people who are at risk for being too authentic.
Thank you. Another one from Brother Afzal. Doctor, thank you. It was an awesome to listening to you. But question is that how being team leader, you can ignore insult of your company team members?
Well, I have great respect, folks. I have great respect for the fact that there are different cultures on our planet and we view things differently. The only thing I can tell you is that I definitely have a Western view, and the global business environment increasingly does agree with my views on these matters. And the idea of insulting someone, the idea of being clearly negative without intent to help them, that is to say insulting or yelling or screaming or using some version of fear as a feedback mechanism or as a motivator. We know as social scientists that if you do those things to your team, you might earn short-term compliance, but you will never earn long-term commitment. So I have to say to you with great respect, even if sometimes you feel an employee or a team has earned a really negative comment or a big insult, your best bet is never to insult them. Your best bet is to find a clear, unemotional, back to emotional intelligence, a clear, level-headed, unemotional response that provides them feedback that, number one, helps them understand how you viewed their behavior. Number two, helps them understand what the performance standard is that you wish to be achieved. And number three, what the consequence will be long-term if they cannot meet that standard. That would be a great role for a leader, always better than something simple like an insult.
Thank you. And then we have one last interesting question, Doc. Doc, an open, frank question to you. Would you go open arms on your wedding ceremony illustrating your tattoos? On a broader note, are we supposed to respect the required attire of an environment by adjusting into it?
That's a great question. Did someone just ask if I would go open-armed, meaning showing my tattoos at a wedding ceremony?
That was the question.
Ali, is that what he said?
Yeah, that was it. This is it.
That's interesting. I think, okay, very interesting. I think there's some cultural issues here. Yeah, I'm definitely, for better or for worse, very American. In the United States, 1 in 5 people have tattoos, and in certain age groups, 25 to 50, 1 in 4. So it's very common here, very, very common. So for me, showing a tattoo at almost any event would not be a problem. In fact, I'm a professional speaker by trade now. I deliver probably 80+ keynote speeches a year around the globe, and I always have my sleeves rolled up, so that's not a problem. But you raise an interesting question when you ask about meeting the norms of a group or deviating from the norms of a group. And what I have to tell you is, even though I happen to be, you know, a loud American with a bunch of tattoos, I want you to hear this clearly. Every team, just like every country, has its own culture. And when you are a member of that team, you have to try and learn their norms, their behavioral tendencies. And if you want to deviate from them, whether it's the type of work, the way you approach your work, the way you dress, or the way you speak, you have to understand that that is a risk. You want to take that risk, good for you. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. I can tell you that abiding by those norms is the expectation for most people, and it is the safe thing to do. It is the respectful thing to do. Now, back to what I said a minute ago. You only, in my opinion, earn the right to deviate through great relationships and great performance. So, for example, a lot of people ask me, hey, what if your boys want to get tattoos like you have? What would you say? And they expect me to say, well, I would support that because I have tattoos. That is not true. What I say is, what kind of person are they at age 18, 19, whenever they say that to me? What kind of person are they? Are they truly full of character? Do they have integrity? Are they accomplishing interesting things? Have they earned the right to deviate in any way, shape, or form? That is a much more interesting perspective. So I like to look at people as being, needing to understand and respect the norms of a group that they belong to. But not everyone should simplistically always follow norms. Sometimes, at least a little bit, deviating, if you've earned it through performance, is a natural human tendency.
Well, just to add also, folks, I must confess that also Dr. During the practice session, he was very, very keen to learn about the cultural sensitivities, and he was asking me the questions, what are the do's and what are the don'ts during the presentation that he was preparing. So, well, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. And Dr. Todd, any concluding remarks that you have before we dismiss out?
I would end where I started, Ali, by saying thank you very kindly for joining us today. I hope that you find these basic but important issues relevant for your careers. And I want to remind all of you that leadership is a skill. It's not something you're born with. It's something you can learn. So I wish you luck.
Thank you very much, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. But in the end, thank you very much, Dr. Todd, for your time. Folks, we are recording this webinar, which will be uploaded on our community, which is community.mud.org. And please do keep in touch with us by joining our Facebook fan page, which is facebook.com/mud.org. Well, thank you very much once again, folks. You all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.